All right, and welcome again to I Love Black People. I'm your host, of course, Sinclair Skinner, and we're just so blessed again to have a wonderful sister who's been in the trenches doing the people's work in a way that has been really inspirational to so many of us. And I know with the COVID and all the things that we've been going through, trying to find a routine and trying to find out how we're going to, face the future with all the uncertainty. This sister's been working very diligently before this administration and with the current administration on the issues of reparations for us as African Americans. And it's important as descendants of enslaved African people that we get what we are to do and get what we deserve. And she's been someone with the technical skills, leveraging resources she doesn't even control, and dealing with some of the most amazing Black people. We love Black people. And with that love, it can be tough love. It can sometimes be easy love, it can be some agape love. But all of these things converge in the political space that is meant to help us. But we know so much of these legislations as well as executives that we're the ones that are going to have to make this happen. So she's been in the trenches. She's been behind the scenes working hard with so many organizations that she's going to be able to lay out and talk about their different roles. But we're really just so honored and pleased to have her again and to be so instrumental in making this show successful with her insight and her ability to make some very complicated historical issues as plain and simple and useful for us.
Help protect us from racism and xenophobia by becoming an I Love Black People ambassador today. Join on iloveblackpeople.com. No matter where you are in the world, join us today and get access to the I Love Black People network. Special thanks to Banneker Communities.
And without further ado, I just want to again welcome our sister, your sister, Sister Teresa Heath. Thank you so much, sister, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Brother Sinclair. It's great to be here again, as always.
All right. Well, look, I know there's a lot going on, and we want to get right to it. So if you can give us an update, again, I think it's been great that you walked this year, this new administration, and kind of kept us up to date on each of the new opportunities and as it relates to votes and organizing in the committees. And you even gave us some really good understanding of how the committee system works with the U.S. Congress, which is not always obvious. Where are we now? And please share with us what your good news.
Right. So right now, with H.R. 40, again, the bill that will establish a federal commission to examine the legacy of slavery and come up with reparation proposals. We are at 175 co-sponsors in the House, more than any other year that this bill has been alive. In 32 congressional sessions, it's been introduced. And on the Senate side, its Senate companion S40 has 19 co-sponsors. So that's overwhelming support within the congressional halls for establishing a slavery reparations commission. But where we are now is getting ready for a historic moment. The House Judiciary Committee has issued a notice to vote on H.R. 40 in committee. This is the step prior to the bill getting onto the House floor and being voted out of the House. And so we are just ecstatic because, this bill has been introduced first by the late Congressman John Conyers in 1989 on the heels of the passage of Japanese reparations for Japanese Americans through the Civil Liberties Act in 1988 was when H.R. 40 was first introduced then in 1989. And it's been introduced every congressional session since. And in none of those sessions has it been voted on. So we have a committee vote scheduled for next Wednesday, April 14th. And that in itself is truly historic to get to that point. We expect there to be a favorable vote out of committee. So then it's reported to the House floor for full consideration. So we're really just riding high on this news, as you've seen states and locales pass their own reparations measures, as well as institutions, religious institutions, businesses, corporations, in addition to universities. And Evanston obviously passing their first phase of their reparations fund, establishing housing grants to rectify local discriminatory policies that impacted Black Evanstonians there, as well as so many other locales that had take matters into their own hands. So,
do you have any more? I'm sorry. Do you have any more besides the Evanston example in the California? I guess the state of California.
Right.
Are there any other ones that you see coming down? The legislative pipeline?
Definitely. I mean, you have Providence, Rhode Island. The mayor issued an executive order to establish a commission for examining reparations proposals for Black and Indigenous communities. You have Asheville, North Carolina, as well, on their quest to gain reparations for local harms that Black people in Asheville have faced. Burlington, Vermont is looking, I think their commission's work has already started. Amherst, Massachusetts is in its earlier phases and has not established its commission yet, but they had at least their local government acknowledge that systemic racism was being perpetuated, and their Black residents were deeply affected. It's no coincidence that Black people were driven out of Amherst, Massachusetts, and now make up a small percentage of that community. So I think you've also seen New Jersey introduce a state reparations bill. So it's really popping all over. And most of these are focused on the legacy of slavery itself. There's other measures, reparative measures, that other jurisdictions are introducing specific to a specific harm and vestige of slavery, like the war on drugs or like housing. So all of that combined, you're seeing hundreds of these proposals actually advancing.
Where are you looking at this week coming up? And again, by the time this airs, there's probably some votes that are going to be taking place. What can you tell us about those things?
Right. So HR 40 is going to be voted on in the House Judiciary Committee on Wednesday, April 14th. Those proceedings start at 10 a.m. You can watch them live at the Judiciary Committee's YouTube website. And what we're really expecting here is a positive vote out of committee. There's only two Democrats who are not co-sponsors of the bill, which means they support the bill and have pinged their support of the bill through a official process through the federal government. And we expect the anticipated vote, hopefully, to be 25 plus. We have obviously 25 Democrats on the committee, 19 Republicans. Obviously, we've been encouraging Republicans to support this reparations bill. But if we don't get any Republican support, that vote is likely to be 25-19. And if, say worst case scenario, you still need 23 votes to get out of the committee. So I think we have enough confidence to see this going and getting passed out favorably onto the House floor for full consideration. If it doesn't pass out of committee, that'll be a challenge. That'll be an issue, because then the bill cannot advance to a House floor vote. But if it does pass out of committee, in that positive scenario, we're looking at hopefully a House floor vote in the near months. I think even looking at, when we think about monumental days and moments, we're headed towards Juneteenth. And that would be a significant marker for this bill to be passed out of the House favorably, or for the House to hold a vote on H.R. 40 around the Juneteenth period, even around the July 4th period, because that's a holiday that we all celebrate nationally. And Black people were still enslaved then. So I think there's a incredible moment ahead if this bill is passed out favorably in the House Judiciary Committee.
There's a bill that has Brother Floyd's name on it that doesn't really add teeth. Do you see timing-wise where that might even also be something that might impact what's next?
I mean, I think it's all connected, right? You can't talk about reparations without talking about excessive police violence and everyday police harassment. We have, the killing of George Floyd, which is the tip of the iceberg, killing of George Floyd and so many others, right? Just in 2020 alone, we had about 1,127 people killed by police. That's 18 days in 2020 where police didn't kill anybody. So, George Floyd is, in his family, we're trying to see justice through a judicial system that is not set up to really protect Black people either, in the same ways that the policing institution is not set up to protect and serve Black people. So I do think it's a moment, because we saw H.R. 40 gain speed and momentum after the summer and fall uprisings of 2020. That kind of energy, because people were stuck at home in their houses on quarantine, forced to watch these videos. You're now seeing, videos emerge from the December 2020 incident with the Army lieutenant in Windsor. These videos grasp people's attention, but this stuff happens in our neighborhoods every day. And a lot of it isn't caught on camera. And so, yes, this is a moment, but I think it speaks to a larger need to be talking about reparations. We cannot just rely on the judicial system for one prosecution of a bad cop. Because the whole entire system it is fraught in violent and will continue to perpetuate violence. The reforms over the years have solidified that violence, not alleviated it. So now we're at a point where we need to be talking about reparations. And one of the things that I think about most is the technical term, in international human rights law standards, is guarantees of non-repetition. How do we ensure not one more police killing? How do we ensure that? That means there needs to be some wide-scale institutional reform, wide-scale imagining of what public safety actually looks like. How can we depend on a policing system to evolve from its original inceptions as slave patrols that surveilled, stopped, and harassed Black people from its inception? How do we expect that system to evolve into anything different that it was designed to do? So this is really a moment where, of course, we want to see justice for George Floyd's family. But what does that justice actually look like? And we are, there's so many people counting on these one prosecutions, when we're going to get to a point where, we've seen it play over and over. The defense of, I fear for my life, or, the defense that the police use of force didn't actually kill the person. We're going to continue to see these white supremacist defenses of a system that was designed to do this to Black people. And it just so happens that the end result can be death. But on a day-to-day, it's profiling, it's surveilling, it's harassment, it's issuing fees and fines, it's stops, unnecessary stops. So I think we're talking about a larger issue here of why people need to invest their time and movements into, gaining progress towards reparations, because that can get people, we can talk about compensation for families in that way. We can talk about trauma-informed care for families of victims of police violence. We can talk about other rehabilitative and legal measures, and we can talk about how we need to possibly dismantle this policing institution and build a matter of public safety that actually protects our communities.
I want us at least be able to have a conversation that speaks to, what would be the steps if that, God forbid, happened.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And I also just want to add something real quick to our previous discussion on George Floyd and his family and, what that means for the country right now, because George Floyd's story is also a story about poverty. It's a story about resources. It's a story about substance use. Those are issues that we have chosen to criminalize over the decades, and not decades and centuries, and not actually treat and invest in Black communities for those issues to not bubble up in a way that affects people's lives. So it really is all interconnected. This is, there's levels to this. And George Floyd's death, although it ended in a police killing, is a long legacy that Black families and other communities face with a lack of resources and a lack of opportunity for this pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness in this country. So exactly where we are, if HR 40 is not passed out of House Judiciary Committee, in the same ways that people, take to the streets around a failed, police killing conviction, is the same way people should take to the streets if HR 40 is not passed. I believe that we are at a specific moment that requires the government. We're not even talking about implementation yet. We are talking about how do we fully diagnose this problem before we treat it? What are the range of harms that the government and non-state actors have committed against Black people that we need to rectify? And if this government, after 150 years, after they promise restitution and reparation through 40 acres and a mule, is willing to continue to stall, and let this bill languish to study and propose the remedies, I think that's a huge setback from where the country is, from where constituents want their government leaders to land on. And it would put Congress on the wrong side of history. There are two sides here. There is no middle ground. You are either for justice and reparation, repair, racial healing, or you're not, and you're for upholding white supremacist systems and oppression that will continue to impact, Black people specifically, but those impacts of racial discrimination and oppression affect all of us. Now, we saw that Citigroup study that said the U.S. economy lost $16 trillion from its GDP because of racial discrimination in the areas, anti-Black racial discrimination in the areas of housing, jobs, and business revenue. So these have impacts for all of us. And if Congress is not willing to step on the right side of history to advance what would study and propose remedies, that would also go against what the majority of this country it has begun to recognize, that the impacts of slavery are long lasting and are with us today.
Give some shout outs to some of the organizations. And I know sometimes that can be a little tricky when you leave somebody out. Maybe not names, or maybe you want to give names. Are there people or organizations that you think may not have been on in the spotlight, but just it'll never be enough if we thank them 1,000 times?
Well, absolutely. I mean, first, I can only start this conversation by thanking NCOBRA and NARC for even getting us in a place where we are today with the Black reparations movement. So that's number one. Gold star to my folks over at NCOBRA and NARC. But we've built a broad, diverse coalition of over 300 organizations, from grassroots to national to small businesses. We have city councils engaged in this work. Okay, this is a large movement for reparations. This isn't just tailored to one specific identity of an organization versus another. So we have multi-ethnic, multiracial, multi-generational reflections of the country in the Why We Can't Wait campaign, which we started last summer in the wake of all of the protests and the racial uprisings, because reparations was a demand in the streets. It will continue to be a demand in the streets, in the virtual halls of Congress, in the virtual halls of Capitol buildings, state Capitol buildings, corporation halls across the country. And it's really just been amazing. I want to thank each and every one of those organizations who have signed on to the Why We Can't Wait campaign, in honor of the words of Dr. Martin Luther King and his seminal text, Why We Can't Wait. They have been just incredible in moving this bill forward. Yes, there's a handful of worker bees, really pushing this forward, but it really is reflective of this larger coalition of churches, of faith groups, of grassroots national organizations from all over the country, from all walks of life, getting us here to this point where we are on the verge of history with HR 40 passing out of the Judiciary Committee.
But in the case of being intersectionalism and working together, what are some of the things that you've seen, if you can report on those?
Yeah, there's been a long legacy of Black and Asian solidarity in the U.S. There are shared histories and there are distinct histories. We all have, a very unique history in this country that is rooted in white supremacist oppression and driven by all aspects of white supremacy, whether you see it or not. And I think that's absolutely been acknowledged through not only you see, Black women, specifically Black women and Asian women coming together, organizations coming together in the wake of, anti-Asian violence, anti-Black violence. But you have historically seen, with the passage of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which granted Japanese Americans redress. So that was in the form of compensation, historical memory, education benefits, and also pardons for wartime relocation crimes, such as resisting being forcibly incarcerated. Civil rights groups were also supportive of that legislation passing. So in turn, we've seen an overwhelming support from these same groups that were involved in the Civil Liberties Act passage for HR 40. We see, Japanese American Citizens League, not just their national office, but their chapters across the country. The Japanese American National Museum, Suru for Solidarity, Nikki Progressives, which has been just like an incredible force across the country, Nikki for Civil Rights and Redress. It's just an overwhelming display of support in many different ways, right? In education, in hosting talks and forums that actually connect these issues, and centralize. Yes, we can say, okay, we have some shared histories, and we can be able to say, my experience is actually very different than your experience. And I think we've been able to get to a place where, where you're not playing oppression Olympics, and instead you're just believing that if we can believe in the repair of the Black community and the liberation of the Black community, then we can believe in that for everybody. But it has to start with, communities that have systemically been wronged, and for, an economy that still is, whose engine is still churning from unpaid slave labor. So I think those are, just recognitions that the Japanese American community has had, that they've spoken to. And numerous times there was powerful testimony in the last HR 40 hearing to that, and to why reparations are the right thing to do. And if we don't move forward on that, that's incredibly detrimental for the country.
Help protect us from racism and xenophobia by becoming an I Love Black People ambassador today. Join on iloveblackpeople.com. No matter where you are in the world, join us today and get access to the I Love Black People network. Special thanks to Banneker Communities.
And for all our listeners, please make sure you reach out to your congressperson. Again, voting is just a tactic, it's not a strategy. Your agenda has to be achieved through all the things that you do every day. This is just one of them. Thank you so much. I am because we are.